William Prater stood at the front desk of the Kensington Marchand Hotel, holding a bouquet of white lilies he'd bought with money he didn't really have to spare, and the woman across the counter, arms folded, looked at him like he'd wandered in off the wrong street. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales. It was the second Saturday of November, cold enough that William's breath fogged a little even inside the lobby doors, and he'd driven 3 hours from Roseburg with the flowers sitting on the passenger seat, wrapped in damp paper towel to keep them fresh. He was 51 years old, gray at the temples, dressed in a denim jacket over a plain shirt, a backpack slung over one shoulder because he didn't own a suitcase anymore. He'd given it away years back when he stopped traveling for anything but this one trip he made every November, alone, to the same hotel, on the same weekend, to stand in the same spot in the garden courtyard where he'd married Renata 22 years earlier. She'd been gone 4 years now. Ovarian cancer, caught late, the kind of diagnosis that rearranges a person's whole calendar around hospital visits until there's nothing left to rearrange. William had a daughter, Josie, 11 now, staying that weekend with her aunt so he could make this trip the way he always did, quietly, without asking anyone to understand it. Just him and a bouquet of lilies because lilies were what Renata carried down the aisle, and he liked to leave a few by the fountain in the courtyard where they'd said their vows. Even though the hotel had changed hands twice since then, and probably nobody working there had any idea why some gray-haired man showed up every November looking like he'd lost something. He hadn't planned on trouble. He'd called ahead a week earlier and been told the courtyard was open to the public during daylight hours. No booking required, and he intended to walk straight through, leave the flowers, and be back in his truck within 20 minutes. But the woman at the front desk that afternoon was new to the property, a sharp, capable manager named Genevieve Marchetti who'd been brought in 3 months earlier specifically to tighten up what she'd been told was a lobby with a loitering problem. Guests complaining about non-guests wandering through, taking photos, using the restrooms. She had a badge on her blazer that said manager, and she had exactly the kind of instinct that made her good at her job on paper and occasionally wrong about the exact thing that mattered. She stepped out from behind the desk when she saw William walking toward the courtyard doors instead of the elevators, flowers in hand, backpack over his shoulder, and she planted herself in his path with her arms crossed. "Can I help you find something, sir?" she said, in a tone that wasn't really a question. "Just heading out to the courtyard," William said. "I called ahead. They said it was open." "The courtyard's for hotel guests," Genevieve said. "Are you checked in with us?" "No, ma'am. I'm not staying the night. Just came to leave these." He held up the lilies a little, like it might explain something, though he could already tell from her face that it wasn't going to. Genevieve had heard versions of this before. Someone with a story, a reason, an exception they were sure applied to them. And she'd learned, or thought she'd learned, that the fastest way to keep the lobby running smoothly was to hold the line before it turned into an argument. "I'm sorry. I can't let you through without a room key or a reservation. If you'd like, I can call ahead and see if the wedding coordinator's available to discuss booking the courtyard for an event, but I really can't have guests, non-guests, wandering the property. It's not an event. I just need 5 minutes by the fountain." "I understand, but I have to be consistent with everyone, or it's not really a policy at all," she said, and there was something almost rehearsed in the way she said it, like she'd said it to somebody else that same week, and it had worked. Behind her, 2 staff members near the concierge desk had gone quiet, watching without quite watching, the way people do when they sense a moment is uncomfortable but aren't sure whose job it is to step in. William didn't raise his voice. He'd learned a long time ago that arguing with someone who's already decided what kind of person you are rarely leads anywhere good. He looked down at the lilies, a little wilted now from the drive, and for a second something crossed his face that had nothing to do with the hotel policy at all. Something closer to exhaustion, the particular kind that comes from missing a person for 4 years and still, every November, driving 3 hours to stand somewhere she once stood. He didn't explain any of that to Genevieve. He just nodded, said thank you anyway, and turned to leave. What Genevieve had no way of knowing, what nobody on that floor knew, because William had never once mentioned it during any of his November visits, was that William Prater owned the Kensington Marchand Hotel, along with 9 other boutique properties across 3 states, all held under a management company he'd built slowly over 2 decades, starting with a single rundown motel he bought with his father's insurance money back when he was 28. He didn't handle daily operations anymore. He had a regional director for that, a man named Cormac Delacroix, who reported directly to William maybe once a month and otherwise ran things without needing his input. William liked it that way. He'd stepped back from the visible parts of the business years ago, partly because Renata had asked him to spend less time at a desk and more time at home, and partly because after she passed, showing up in a boardroom in a suit had started to feel like a costume he no longer had the energy to wear. He got back in his truck that afternoon and sat there for a minute with the lilies on the passenger seat, engine off, staring at the hotel's front doors. He wasn't angry, exactly. He was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. He thought about how many other people had probably stood in that same spot Genevieve had put him in. People with a real reason to be somewhere, judged in 4 seconds flat by a jacket or a backpack or a face that didn't look like it belonged in a place with marble floors. He thought about Renata, who used to say that the way a person treated someone who couldn't do anything for them told you the whole truth about who they were. He thought about it long enough that he decided, instead of driving straight home, he'd come back the next morning and have an actual conversation, not to punish anyone, but because the reviews his office had been getting about this property lately had used almost exactly the same word Genevieve had used to him, consistent, like it was a virtue instead of sometimes just an excuse. The next morning, William came back wearing a collared shirt, the same lilies replaced with a fresh bouquet he'd bought at a shop 2 blocks away, and asked the desk to call for the manager. When Genevieve came out and recognized him from the day before, her first instinct was mild irritation. Here's this man again. Until Cormac, who'd driven up that morning at William's request, walked in behind him and greeted William by name, deferentially, the way you greet the person who signs your checks. Genevieve's face changed slowly, in stages, the way a person's does when they're recalculating everything they thought they understood about the last 24 hours. William asked her to sit with him for a few minutes, not in an office, just at a small table near the courtyard doors, and he told her plainly who he was, then asked her, genuinely asked, not as a trap, why she'd made the call she made the day before. She was honest with him, to her credit. She said she'd been told to tighten the lobby, that she'd had 3 incidents in her first month with people using the courtyard as a shortcut or a photo backdrop for weddings they hadn't booked, and that somewhere in trying to fix that, she'd stopped asking herself whether the rule made sense for the person standing in front of her, and started just applying it evenly, because evenly felt safer than being wrong. William listened to all of it without interrupting, and when she was done, he told her about Renata, briefly, plainly, the way he might tell a colleague rather than a stranger, about the wedding, the lilies, the fountain, for Novembers of driving 3 hours for 5 quiet minutes nobody was supposed to notice. He didn't ask her to apologize, though she did anyway, quietly, and meant it. He told her the courtyard policy needed a carve-out for exactly the kind of situation she'd turned away, short, non-disruptive visits, verified with a simple phone call rather than a flat no. And he asked her to write that policy herself, since she was the one who'd feel its weight the next time someone walked through those doors looking like they didn't belong. She did, within the week, and it became standard across all 10 properties by spring. Genevieve stayed on, and over the following year William noticed something in the way she ran that lobby, a little more room left in it for people whose story she didn't yet know. That November, and every November after, William walked straight through to the courtyard without anyone stopping him, lilies in hand, and nobody working there asked him why. Genevieve made sure of that herself, quietly, without ever needing to be told twice. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. Comment, kindness still exists, if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. Nobody ever needs to own a hotel for their decency to matter, and nobody needs a title on their blazer to know when a rule has stopped serving the person it was meant to protect. William never went back to punish anyone. He went back because somewhere between the lobby doors and his truck, he remembered that respect isn't something you demand at a front desk. It's something you build, one honest conversation at a time, long after the flowers have already wilted.